They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is how that blood can poison everything it touches when it's used to measure love. Hey, everyone watching, before we dive into this story, let me ask you something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you, it's going to make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. And if you've ever felt like the forgotten child, the one who had to fight for scraps of attention while your sibling got the whole feast, then please hit that subscribe button. This story is for you, and I promise you're going to want to hear how this ends. My name is Sarah, and for 28 years, I lived in the shadow of my younger sister Madison. Not because she was more talented, more beautiful, or more deserving, but because from the moment she drew her first breath, my parents decided she was their masterpiece, and I was just the rough draft they'd practiced on. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and the conversation dies? When you realize they were talking about something wonderful that doesn't include you. That was my childhood. Every single day. Madison got piano lessons while I got hand-me-down clothes. Madison got private tutoring while I worked part-time jobs to pay for my own textbooks. Madison got unconditional love while I got conditional tolerance. The worst part wasn't even the obvious favoritism. It was how they made me feel guilty for noticing it. Sarah, don't be jealous, Mom would say whenever I dared to point out the disparity. Madison needs more support right now.
Right now.
As if there would ever be a time when it would be my turn. Dad was worse in his own way. At least Mom's favoritism came wrapped in maternal concern. Dad's was just cold. Practical. Madison was his investment, his pride and joy, his ticket to bragging rights at the country club. I was his disappointment. The daughter who chose a state school over the Ivy League he'd dreamed of, who studied business instead of law, who wanted to build something from the ground up instead of climbing the ladder he'd already built for me. You're wasting your potential, Sarah, he'd say every time I mention my entrepreneurial dreams. Madison understands what it takes to succeed in this world. She has vision. Vision. That's what he called Madison's ability to spend their money on whatever caught her fancy that week. Art classes she'd abandon after a month. A photography business that lasted exactly as long as it took to buy all the expensive equipment. A jewelry-making phase that ended when she realized it involved actual work. But me? When I presented them with a detailed business plan for a digital marketing consultancy at age 25, complete with projected earnings and market analysis, Dad barely glanced at it before suggesting I get some real-world experience first, by working for someone else. When Madison announced she wanted to open a boutique at 23 with zero business experience, they handed her $50,000 and told her to follow her dreams. The boutique failed within 6 months. They never mentioned the money again. I watched this pattern repeat itself over and over, each time thinking that surely now they'd see what was happening. Surely now they'd realize they had 2 daughters, not just one. But instead of learning from Madison's failures, they seemed to double down on their investment in her, as if throwing more money and attention her way would somehow validate all the money and attention they'd already wasted. Meanwhile, I was building my own life brick by brick. I worked 60-hour weeks at a marketing firm while freelancing on the side. I saved every penny I could, living in a cramped studio apartment while Madison moved back home rent-free after college. I networked, I studied, I sacrificed. And slowly, so slowly, that even I didn't realize it was happening, I began to succeed. My freelance clients were getting bigger. My strategies were working. Companies were noticing me. But I kept quiet about it all, some masochistic part of me still hoping that if I could just prove myself worthy, if I could just work hard enough, maybe my parents would finally see me. The irony is that I was so focused on winning their approval that I almost missed the moment my life changed forever. It was a Tuesday in March, and I was sitting in a Starbucks at 7 in the morning, reviewing a campaign proposal for what I thought was just another potential client. The company was called Meridian Digital Solutions, and they were looking for someone to handle their complete digital transformation. I'd been recommended by another client, and honestly, I was just hoping to land a decent contract that would help me finally move out of that studio apartment. I had no idea that the woman sitting across from me, Janet Morrison, was about to offer me something that would change everything. "Sarah," she said, sliding the contract across the table, "I'm not just looking for a consultant. I'm looking for a partner. Someone who can take this company to the next level while I focus on expansion." What would you say to a 70-30 split, with you as majority stakeholder and CEO? I remember staring at the numbers on that contract for a full 30 seconds before they made sense. This wasn't just a job offer, it was a golden ticket. Janet had built Meridian into a mid-level success, but she was burned out and ready to step back. She needed someone with fresh ideas and the drive to execute them.
She needed me.
But here's the thing about living in someone else's shadow for 28 years. You stop believing in your own light. Even as I signed that contract, even as I shook Janet's hand and tried to process what was happening, part of me was convinced it was all a mistake. That they'd realized they meant to offer this to someone else. Someone more like Madison. I didn't tell my parents about the opportunity.
Not yet.
I wanted to prove myself first, to show them something concrete they couldn't dismiss or diminish. I wanted to walk into their house not as the disappointment daughter, but as someone who'd made it. Someone worthy of their pride. Looking back now, I realized that was my first mistake. I was still playing their game, still seeking their validation, still believing that their opinion of me mattered more than my own opinion of myself. If I'd known what was coming, if I'd known how deep their betrayal would cut, how completely they were willing to sacrifice me for Madison's comfort, maybe I would have played it differently. Maybe I would have protected myself better. Maybe I would have seen the warning signs. But I didn't. I was still their daughter, still hoping for love that would never come. And that hope, that desperate, pathetic hope, was about to cost me more than I ever imagined possible. The transformation of Meridian Digital Solutions began immediately, but it was subtle at first. I spent my days restructuring operations, my evenings pitching to new clients, and my weekends studying market trends until my eyes burned. I was running on pure adrenaline and the intoxicating taste of real control over my own destiny. Within 3 months, our revenue had increased by 40%. Within 6 months, we'd landed our first 7-figure client. I was living and breathing this company, pouring every ounce of my intelligence and ambition into making it succeed. And it was working. But success, I was learning, is a double-edged sword. The more Meridian grew, the more time I had to spend managing that growth. Client calls at all hours, emergency strategy sessions, travel to meet with potential partners. I was busier than I'd ever been in my life, and I loved every minute of it. Well, almost every minute. There were still those quiet moments, usually late at night when I was finally alone in my apartment, when I'd think about my parents. Wonder if they'd be proud of what I was building. Wonder if Madison would ever see me as anything other than her boring older sister who worked too much. I kept telling myself I'd share the news when the timing was right, when I had something really impressive to show them, when the success was undeniable. But the truth is I was scared. Scared they'd find a way to diminish it, the way they'd diminished every other achievement in my life. Scared they'd somehow make it about Madison, about how I should be supporting her dreams instead of pursuing my own. Scared they'd look at everything I'd built and still find it lacking. So I kept my secret, and I kept working, and I told myself that soon, very soon, I'd be ready to step out of the shadows and into the light I'd created for myself. I had no idea that my 30th birthday was about to become the stage for the most devastating performance of my parents' favoritism yet. Or that their final betrayal would be exactly what I needed to stop seeking their love and start demanding their respect. There are moments in your life when the universe holds up a mirror and forces you to see the truth you've been avoiding. My 30th birthday was supposed to be one of celebration, but instead, it became the moment I finally saw my family for who they really were. I'd been planning this birthday for months. Not because I'm particularly sentimental about birthdays, but because 30 felt significant. It felt like a milestone worth marking, especially given everything that was happening with Meridian. The company was thriving beyond my wildest dreams, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had something worth celebrating. More than that, though, I wanted my family there to see it. I wanted them to see that their disappointment daughter had made something of herself. That maybe, just maybe, I'd been worth their attention all along. I planned everything carefully. Dinner at Chez Laurent, the upscale French restaurant where we'd celebrated all of Madison's major milestones over the years. I made reservations for 6, hoping to include my parents, Madison, and maybe even bring a date if I could work up the courage to ask David, the venture capitalist I'd been seeing casually. I called Mom 3 weeks before to give them plenty of notice. I'd love to celebrate my birthday with the family, I said, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. I know it's not something we usually do for me, but 30 feels important. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a good pause. A pause that made my stomach clench with familiar dread. "Oh, Sarah, honey," Mom said in that tone. That carefully modulated tone she used when she was about to deliver disappointing news while making it sound like it was somehow for my own good. "I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to pass on the birthday dinner." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Okay," I said slowly. "Is everything all right? We could do it another day if—" "It's Madison," Mom interrupted. "She's been going through such a hard time lately with the boutique closing and everything. She really needs a change of scenery, some time to recharge and find herself again. We found this amazing yoga retreat in Tulum, very exclusive, very healing. It's exactly what she needs right now." I felt something cold settle in my chest. That sounds wonderful for her. When is she going? Well, that's the thing. The retreat starts the day after your birthday, and it's quite expensive. We need to help her with the costs, of course. Between the program fees and the flights and the accommodations, well, we just don't have room in the budget for a birthday celebration right now. You understand, don't you? You've always been so practical about these things." Practical. There was that word again. The word they used to make my disappointment sound like a virtue. The word they used to justify why Madison got everything while I got nothing. "How much?" I asked quietly. "I'm sorry." "The retreat. How much does it cost?" Another pause. "Sarah, that's not really—" "How much, Mom?"
A sigh.
$12,000. But it includes everything: meals, accommodations, private sessions with world-renowned instructors. It's really a bargain when you think about it. $12,000. For a yoga retreat. While my own mother couldn't spare $100 for a birthday dinner at a restaurant where I'd never been celebrated. Never been chosen. Never been priority. "I see." I managed. "I knew you'd understand," Mom said, relief flooding her voice. "You're so mature about these things, Sarah. Not everyone would be so supportive of their sister's healing journey." Healing journey. As if Madison's string of failed ventures and irresponsible choices constituted some kind of trauma that required luxury intervention. "Maybe we can do something simple for your birthday instead," Mom continued. "A nice dinner at home? I could make your favorite pot roast." My favorite pot roast. The same meal she'd made for every one of my birthdays since I was 12, back when it actually was my favorite. Back before I developed more sophisticated tastes, before I'd learned to appreciate things beyond my childhood comfort foods. But she wouldn't know that, because she'd never bothered to ask what I actually liked anymore. "Sure, Mom," I heard myself say. "That sounds fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall for 20 minutes. $12,000 for Madison to find herself at a luxury resort in Mexico. But no budget for a single meal to celebrate my existence. The worst part wasn't even the money, though. It was the casualness of it. The way Mom had delivered the news like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like of course Madison's whims would take precedence over my milestone. Like it had never even occurred to her that I might matter too. I tried to tell myself it didn't hurt. I tried to summon the practical, understanding persona they expected from me. But sitting there alone in my studio apartment, surrounded by the evidence of my professional success, but none of my personal worth, I finally let myself feel the full weight of 28 years of coming second. I thought about calling them back. Thought about telling them I'd pay for my own birthday dinner, that they didn't need to contribute anything. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew it would change nothing. They'd still prioritize Madison's schedule, still make it clear that her needs came first. They'd still find a way to center her even in my celebration. Instead, I did what I always did when my family disappointed me. I threw myself into work. Meridian was in the middle of negotiations with a major telecommunications company, and the contract needed my complete attention. I spent the next 2 weeks buried in strategy sessions and presentations, telling myself that professional success was better than personal validation anyway. That building something meaningful was more important than birthday cakes and family dinners. But deep down, in the parts of myself I tried not to examine too closely, I was planning something else entirely. Not consciously, not deliberately. But some part of me had begun to crystallize around a simple truth. I was done being the daughter who understood. Done being the sister who supported. Done being the one who always accommodated everyone else's needs, while my own went unnoticed. I didn't know yet what that would mean. Didn't know how my quiet resentment would transform into something more decisive. But the seed was planted during that phone call with Mom, watered by years of accumulated disappointment, and it was starting to grow into something my family wouldn't be able to ignore. My 30th birthday was still 2 weeks away, and I had no idea that it would become the night everything changed. The night I finally stopped asking for their love and started demanding their attention. The night they realized that their practical, understanding daughter had been keeping secrets of her own. And sometimes, the quiet ones are the most dangerous of all. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you know that feeling when you're sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by people who are supposed to love you, but you might as well be a ghost for all the attention you're getting. That's exactly how I felt on my 30th birthday, picking at Mom's pot roast while listening to Madison gush about her upcoming spiritual journey. The retreat focuses on chakra alignment and ancestral healing, Madison was saying, her eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm she usually reserved for new credit cards and sample sales. I've been carrying so much negative energy from the boutique failure. I need to release that trauma and reconnect with my authentic self. Dad nodded sagely, as if Madison had just shared profound wisdom instead of new age nonsense she'd probably read on Instagram. It's important to invest in your emotional well-being, he said. Sometimes you have to spend money to save yourself. I almost choked on my pot roast. Spend money to save yourself. This from the man who told me that my business plan was financially irresponsible and that I needed to prove myself in the real world before taking any risks. Sarah, you're awfully quiet tonight, Mom said, finally noticing my existence. Are you enjoying your dinner? I made extra gravy, just the way you like it. Just the way I used to like it. When I was 15 and my palate hadn't evolved beyond comfort food. But correcting her would only lead to that familiar lecture about how I'd become too fancy for the simple things that had made me happy as a child. It's fine, Mom. Thank you. Madison barely looked up from her phone, where she was showing Dad pictures of the resort. Look at this infinity pool, she gushed. And they have these private cabanas right on the beach. I can already feel my stress melting away just looking at it. $12,000 to feel stress melt away. I wondered what that felt like, having that kind of financial cushion. Having parents who saw your emotional well-being as an investment worth making instead of a luxury you couldn't afford. When do you leave? I asked, not because I cared about the answer, but because the silence was becoming oppressive. Tomorrow afternoon, Madison said. I can barely contain my excitement. This is exactly what I need to figure out my next chapter. Next chapter. Madison was 26 years old and had already had more next chapters than most people have in a lifetime. Art school, the photography business, the boutique, and now this spiritual awakening phase. Each one funded by Mom and Dad, each one abandoned the moment it required actual effort or faced any real challenges. Meanwhile, I'd been building Meridian for 8 months in complete secrecy, working 18-hour days, making sacrifices they couldn't even imagine. And not once, had they asked how I was doing, what my next chapter might look like, or whether I might need any kind of support. The irony was almost funny. There I was, sitting at that dinner table as the CEO of a company worth more than Dad made in 2 years, and they were treating me like I was still their directionless daughter who needed to find her way in the world. I'm sure the retreat will be amazing, I said, and I meant it. Not because I wanted Madison to have a good time, but because every day she spent in Tulum was another day she wasn't here, demanding attention and resources. I was tired of watching my parents pour into her bottomless pit of need. You should think about doing something like this yourself, Sarah, Mom said suddenly. You work too much. When was the last time you took a real vacation? A real vacation. As if the problem with my life was that I wasn't spending enough time lying on beaches and finding myself. As if my dedication to building something meaningful was a character flaw that needed correcting. I'm fine, Mom. I actually enjoy my work. But that's not healthy, Dad interjected. All work and no play, you know? Madison understands the importance of balance. Balance. Madison, who hadn't worked a full-time job in 3 years, understood balance. Madison, who'd never met a responsibility she couldn't abandon or a commitment she couldn't break, was their example of healthy living. I was about to respond, though what I would have said I'll never know, when my phone rang. Now, I should mention that my phone had been buzzing all day with birthday messages from friends and colleagues. People who actually remembered my birthday without me having to remind them. People who thought I was worth celebrating. But I'd been ignoring all of them, trying to focus on this pathetic family dinner, trying to squeeze some meaning out of this hollow gesture. But this call was different. This call was from my assistant, Jennifer, and she only called my personal phone for emergencies. Sorry, I said, reaching for the phone. I should take this. At dinner? Mom's voice had that edge it got when she thought someone was being rude. Can it wait? I glanced at the screen. Jennifer's name was flashing, and she'd already called twice. It's work. It'll just take a second. I answered without looking at my family's faces, though I could feel their disapproval radiating across the table. Jennifer? What's going on? Sarah? Her voice was bright and excited, loud enough that I knew everyone could hear her. I'm so sorry to call during your birthday dinner, but I have incredible news. The Morrison Group just confirmed they want to acquire Meridian. The offer is beyond what we discussed. And Sarah, they want to keep you on as CEO of the combined entity. The contract is ready for your review, and they're sending a car for you right now. My heart stopped. The Morrison Group, one of the largest consulting conglomerates in the country. They'd been circling Meridian for weeks, but I thought we were months away from any real offers. Wow, I managed, acutely aware of the silence that had fallen over the dinner table. I know, right? Oh, and Sarah? Your private jet is already being fueled. They want to fly you to Chicago tonight to meet with their board first thing in the morning. Boss, your life is about to change in the most incredible way. Boss. She'd called me boss. In front of my family. In front of my parents, who still saw me as their disappointment daughter. In front of Madison, who thought success meant spending other people's money on yoga retreats. The silence at the dinner table was deafening. I heard Dad's fork hit his plate. Actually heard it, the small metallic clink cutting through the sudden tension like a blade. Sarah, Jennifer continued, oblivious to the bomb she'd just detonated in my childhood dining room, I need to know, should I confirm the jet for tonight, or would you prefer to fly out first thing tomorrow? Either way, this is it. This is everything we've been working toward. Everything we've been working toward. 8 months of 18-hour days, of building something from nothing, of proving myself in ways my family had never bothered to notice. And now it was paying off in a way that even they couldn't ignore. I looked up at my family's faces. Mom's mouth was actually hanging open. Madison had stopped scrolling through her phone and was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. And Dad was looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time in 30 years. I started to speak, then stopped. Because suddenly I realized I had a choice to make. I could downplay this, the way I downplayed everything else. I could apologize for the interruption, hang up the phone, and pretend this conversation had never happened. I could go back to being their practical, understanding daughter who never made waves and never demanded attention. Or I could finally let them see who I really was. Jennifer, I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my entire world was spinning off its axis, confirm the jet. I'll be there within the hour. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Could hear Madison's breathing. Could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Finally, Dad found his voice. Sarah, he said slowly, what exactly is going on? And that's when I smiled. Really smiled, for the first time in months. Because after 30 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, I was finally about to get their undivided attention. "What's going on, Dad?" I said, standing up and placing my napkin on the table with deliberate precision. "Is that your disappointment daughter just became a millionaire?" You know that moment when you drop a bomb in casual conversation and watch people's entire understanding of reality crumble around them? When you realize you've been holding all the power in the room, but nobody knew it, including you. That was me, standing in my parents' dining room, watching 3 decades of family dynamics collapse in real time. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Mom was the first to break it, her voice barely above a whisper. "A millionaire? Sarah, what are you talking about?" I looked around the table at their faces, confusion, disbelief, and something else I'd never seen before when they looked at me. Something that looked almost like respect. Or maybe just shock. Either way, it was better than the usual indifference. "I'm talking about Meridian Digital Solutions," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "The company I've been building for the past 8 months. The company I'm the CEO and majority stakeholder of. The company that's about to be acquired for $47 million. Madison's phone clattered to the table. 47 what? Million, I repeated, savoring the way the words seemed to echo in the suddenly airless room. With an M. Dad was shaking his head slowly, like he was trying to process information in a language he didn't speak. "Sarah, how is this possible? You work for a marketing firm." "I worked for a marketing firm," I corrected. "I quit 8 months ago to start my own company. I've been meaning to tell you, but..." I shrugged, letting the unfinished sentence hang in the air. Let them fill in the blanks about why I might not have felt comfortable sharing good news with my own family. 8 months. Mom's voice was getting higher. "You've been running a company for 8 months, and you didn't tell us?" The hurt in her voice almost made me feel guilty. Almost. But then I remembered every time I'd tried to share something important and been dismissed, every achievement that had been overshadowed by whatever Madison needed that week, every moment I'd felt invisible in my own family. "I wanted to wait until I had something concrete to show you," I said. "Something you couldn't dismiss or find fault with." "We would never," Dad started, but I cut him off. "Wouldn't you? Dad, when I brought you my business plan 3 years ago, you told me I was being unrealistic. You said I should focus on getting experience working for someone else instead of chasing pipe dreams." His face reddened. "That was different. You were young, inexperienced. I was 27. The same age Madison is now. The same age she was when you gave her $50,000 to open a boutique with 0 business experience." The comparison hung in the air like an accusation. Because that's what it was. Madison finally found her voice. "Wait, you're saying you're actually rich? Like, actually rich?" There was something in her tone, a mixture of incredulity and what sounded almost like betrayal. As if my success was somehow a personal affront to her. "I'm saying I built something," I replied. "Something that people want to buy. Something that has value." "But how?" she pressed. "You never even seemed ambitious. You were always just working. We thought you were stuck in some dead-end job. Just working. As if my dedication, my long hours, my refusal to give up when things got difficult was somehow evidence of a lack of ambition rather than an abundance of it." "I was working," I said. "I was building something while you were, what was it you called it? Finding yourself." The dig landed exactly as intended. Madison's face flushed, and for a moment, she looked like she might cry. But I was past caring about her feelings. Past protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of my own dignity. "Sarah," Mom said, her voice taking on that placating tone I knew so well, "we're happy for you, of course. But there's no need to be cruel to your sister." Cruel. I was being cruel by finally telling the truth. By finally refusing to pretend that Madison's failures and my successes existed in separate universes that never touched. "You're right, Mom," I said. "There's no need for cruelty. Just like there was no need to cancel my birthday dinner so Madison could go to a spa in Mexico." "It's not a spa," Madison protested weakly. "It's a retreat. It's for healing."
Right.
Healing. At $12,000. Because that's what it costs to heal from the trauma of having every single one of your mistakes cushioned by other people's money. That's enough, Dad said sharply. Madison has been through a difficult time. And I haven't. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I was past caring about tone. Do you have any idea what it's like to build a company from scratch? To risk everything on an idea that might fail? To work 18-hour days for months, not knowing if you're building something or just burning through your savings? They were all staring at me now, really staring like they were seeing me for the first time. You want to know about difficult times? I continued. Let me tell you about the night 3 months ago when I had to choose between paying my rent and making payroll for my employees. About the week I lived on peanut butter sandwiches because every penny I had was tied up in a campaign that might not work. About the morning I woke up in my office because I'd been working so late I couldn't justify the cab ride home. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Car will be there in 10 minutes. Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. This is really happening. 8 a.m. board meeting. In Chicago. To discuss the acquisition that would change my life forever. And I was standing in my parents' dining room, finally having the confrontation I'd been avoiding for 3 decades. I have to go, I said, grabbing my purse from the sideboard. Wait, Dad said, standing up. Sarah, we need to talk about this. This changes things. Changes things. Of course it did. Money always changed things in my family. It was the only language they spoke fluently, the only value they consistently recognized. Does it? I asked. Because it seems to me like nothing's changed at all. You still prioritized Madison's wants over my needs. You still assumed I was the failure, and she was the success. The only difference is that now you know you were wrong. Mom was wringing her hands. Sarah, please. We had no idea. If we'd known. If you'd known what? You would have canceled Madison's trip? You would have celebrated my birthday? You would have asked how I was doing instead of assuming I was just drifting through life without direction or ambition. The questions hung in the air unanswered, because we all knew the truth. Nothing would have changed. Madison would still have gotten her trip, and I would still have gotten pot roast and apologies. My phone rang again. Jennifer. I have to take this, I said, walking toward the front door. They followed me, a confused parade of family members who suddenly didn't know their place in my story. Jennifer? Sarah, the car's outside. Are you ready for this? Because I have to tell you, the preliminary terms they're discussing, this isn't just a buyout. They want to make you head of their entire digital division. This could be the beginning of something massive. I looked back at my family, clustered in the hallway like they were trying to figure out how to navigate this new version of me. Mom looked shell-shocked. Dad looked calculating. I could practically see him trying to figure out how this reflected on him. And Madison. Madison looked lost, like she was realizing that the script we'd all been following for 26 years had suddenly been rewritten without her permission. I'm ready, I told Jennifer. And for the first time in my life, I actually meant it. I hung up and looked at my family one more time. I'll call you when I get back from Chicago, I said. Maybe we can have that conversation then. Maybe we can talk about how things are going to change. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a confidence I'd never felt in this house before. Sarah, Mom called after me. We love you. You know that, right? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Love. Such a complicated word in a family like ours. They probably did love me in their way. But love without respect, love without attention, love without priority. What was that really worth? I know, Mom, I said without turning around. But maybe it's time you showed it. And then I walked out the door, leaving 30 years of family dynamics behind me, and stepped into a car that would take me to the airport, where a private jet was waiting to carry me into a future they'd never bothered to imagine for me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. Sometimes it's just finally becoming who you were meant to be and letting everyone else deal with their assumptions crumbling around them. There's something surreal about sitting in a private jet at 30,000 feet, sipping champagne, and reviewing acquisition documents worth more money than your parents make in a decade. Especially when 12 hours ago, Those same parents were telling you they couldn't afford to take you out to dinner for your birthday. The jet was everything you'd imagine from movies: leather seats that reclined into beds, a full bar, Wi-Fi that actually worked, and complete silence except for the gentle hum of engines carrying me toward a future I'd never dared to dream about. Jennifer had arranged everything, down to having my favorite snacks waiting in the cabin and a fresh change of clothes for tomorrow's board meeting. As we climbed through the clouds above Illinois, I found myself thinking about the look on Dad's face when he dropped his fork. That moment of complete cognitive dissonance, when everything he thought he knew about his eldest daughter collided with a reality he hadn't bothered to notice. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd left the house. Text messages from Mom, missed calls from Dad, and a series of increasingly frantic messages from Madison that ranged from congratulatory to accusatory to something that looked almost like panic. Madison, I can't believe you didn't tell us about any of this. Madison, wait, are you seriously on a private jet right now? Madison, Mom is crying. She says she feels like she doesn't even know you anymore. Madison, Sarah, this is crazy. How long have you been planning this? Madison, are you mad at us? Is this why you've been so distant lately? Madison, can we talk when you get back? I think there's been a misunderstanding. The last message almost made me laugh out loud. A misunderstanding. As if 28 years of systematic favoritism was just a simple mix-up that could be cleared up with a heart-to-heart conversation. But it was the message from Dad that really got to me. Dad, Sarah, I think we need to discuss your financial situation when you return. There are tax implications and investment strategies we should consider. Call me. Even now, even after everything, his first instinct was to insert himself into my success, to position himself as the expert I needed to guide me through this windfall, as if I hadn't just spent 8 months building something he never believed I was capable of creating. I turned off my phone and looked out the window at the lights of cities passing below, each one representing thousands of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, building their own versions of success. How many of them, I wondered, were struggling to prove their worth to families who'd already decided they weren't worth much? The flight attendant, because apparently I had a flight attendant now, approached with another glass of champagne. Miss Chun, she said with professional warmth, we'll be landing in Chicago in about 40 minutes. Is there anything else you need to prepare for your morning meeting? Ms. Chun, not Sarah. Not honey or sweetie or any of the diminutive names my family used to keep me small and manageable. Just the respectful acknowledgement of an adult woman who'd earned her place in this cabin. Actually, I said, could you help me understand something? This acquisition. Do you know how many companies Morrison Group typically buys in a year? She smiled. I've been flying their executives for 3 years now. They're very selective. Maybe 2 or 3 acquisitions annually, and only companies they see as game changers in their respective markets. Game changers. That's what Meridian was to them. What I was to them. Not the practical daughter who should be grateful for pot roast dinners and hand-me-down attention. Not the sister who should step aside so Madison could shine. A game changer. The CEO, Mr. Morrison, he specifically requested this flight for you, she continued. Said it was important that you felt valued from the moment you agreed to the meeting. He's quite impressed with what you've built. Valued? When was the last time my family had made me feel valued? When was the last time they'd gone out of their way to make me feel important, respected, prioritized? I thought about Madison's retreat in Tulum. $12,000 for her to feel better about failing at her latest venture. Compare that to the gesture Morrison Group was making, a private jet, a personal meeting with their board, an offer that recognized not just my company's worth, but my own. The difference was stark, and it wasn't just about money. It was about recognition, about seeing potential and investing in it rather than constantly managing disappointment. My laptop chimed with an email from Jennifer. She'd sent me background information on the Morrison Group executives I'd be meeting in the morning, along with some preliminary questions they might ask. But attached to the professional briefing was a personal note. Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to know something. In 12 years of working as an executive assistant, I've never seen anyone work harder or deserve success more than you do. What happened tonight at dinner with your family? I heard some of it when I called. I hope you know that the way they treated you says nothing about your worth and everything about their inability to recognize it. You've built something incredible, and tomorrow you're going to show the world exactly what you're capable of. I'm so proud to work for you. Jennifer. I had to read it twice because my eyes kept blurring. Someone was proud to work for me. Someone had noticed my work, my dedication, my sacrifices. Someone valued what I'd built. And it wasn't my family. The plane began its descent into Chicago, the city lights growing larger and more defined below us. Somewhere down there was a boardroom where powerful people were waiting to meet me, to discuss my future, to offer me opportunities my parents couldn't have imagined. Somewhere down there was validation that had nothing to do with family loyalty or genetic obligation. I thought about the retreat Madison would be starting in Tulum in just a few hours. $12,000 for her to find herself, while I was about to sell a company I'd built from nothing for $47 million. The irony was almost poetic. But more than that, I thought about the conversation waiting for me when I returned home. The questions, the demands for explanation, the sudden interest in my life now that it came with a dollar figure they couldn't ignore. Part of me, the part that had spent 30 years seeking their approval, wanted to share this victory with them. Wanted to bring them into this new chapter of my life and finally get the recognition I'd been craving since childhood. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger with each mile we flew away from them, wondered why I should. Why I should give them access to joy they'd never helped me create. Why I should let them claim credit for success they'd never supported. The plane touched down smoothly at O'Hare, and as we taxied to the private terminal, I made a decision. Not about the acquisition that was already decided, but about my family, about the power dynamics that had shaped 30 years of my life, and about what came next. They wanted to know about my financial situation. They wanted to discuss my future. They wanted to suddenly be involved in my success. Fine, but it was going to be on my terms this time. And I was going to make sure they understood exactly what it had cost them to overlook me for so long. The flight attendant helped me gather my things as the plane came to a complete stop. Ms. Chun, she said, there's a car waiting to take you to your hotel. Your meeting is at 8 a.m. sharp. Morrison Group's headquarters, 42nd floor. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. For everything. As I walked down the steps of the jet onto the tarmac, Chicago's skyline glittering in front of me, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Not just success, not just validation, but something more powerful. Complete control over my own story. And tomorrow morning, I was going to start writing a new chapter. One where I was the protagonist instead of the supporting character in someone else's drama. Walking into Morrison Group's headquarters at 7:45 a.m. felt like stepping into a different universe. 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and a conference room that probably cost more to furnish than most people's houses. This was power. This was what success looked like when nobody was there to diminish it or redirect attention elsewhere. James Morrison himself was waiting for me, along with 3 other executives whose names I'd memorized from Jennifer's briefing. But what struck me most wasn't their impressive credentials or the weight of the moment. It was how they looked at me. With respect. With genuine interest. Like I belonged there. Sarah, James said, standing to shake my hand, thank you for making the trip on such short notice. I know we disrupted your birthday celebration. Birthday celebration. He'd remembered it was my birthday. A man I'd met twice in business settings had bothered to note and acknowledge something my own family had treated as an inconvenience. Not at all, I replied, settling into the leather chair across from him. I'm excited to hear what you have in mind. What followed was 2 hours of the most stimulating professional conversation of my life. They'd done their homework. They knew Meridian's client list, our growth trajectory, our innovative approaches to digital marketing. More than that, they understood the vision I'd been building toward, even when I hadn't fully articulated it myself. What we're proposing, said Rebecca Chen, their chief strategy officer, isn't just an acquisition. We want to make Meridian the foundation of our entire digital transformation division. We're talking about scaling your model across our entire client base, Fortune 500 companies, international corporations, government contracts. The numbers they presented were staggering. Not just the purchase price, but the growth potential, the resources they'd put behind expansion, the autonomy I'd have as the division head. It was everything I dreamed of, and more than I'd dared to hope for. "There's one thing I need to understand," I said, leaning forward. "Why me? You could build this division from scratch, hire someone with more experience, more credentials." James smiled. "Sarah, in 3 years of watching the digital marketing space, I've never seen anyone combine strategic thinking with execution the way you do. Your client retention rate is unheard of. Your team loyalty is exceptional. And frankly, your instincts about market trends have been right more often than analysts with decades more experience." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a chart. "This is your company's performance compared to firms 3 times your size. You're outperforming them in every metric that matters. That's not luck. That's leadership." Leadership. A word that had never been applied to me in my family home. There I was practical, reliable, supportive, but never a leader. Never someone whose vision deserved to be followed. "I'll be honest," Rebecca added, "we've been watching Meridian since your Hartfield campaign went viral. The way you turned around their brand perception in 6 weeks? We've had teams trying to figure out how you did it. And when we dug deeper, we realized it wasn't just that campaign. It was everything. You don't just solve problems, you anticipate them." They spent another hour walking me through the integration plan, the team structure, the timeline for expansion. Every detail reinforced the same message. They saw me as the architect of something significant, not just a lucky entrepreneur who'd stumbled onto success. My phone buzzed during a brief break. A text from Madison. "Mom says you're in some kind of business meeting in Chicago? Call me when you can." This is all so confusing.
Confusing.
The fact that I'd built something meaningful was confusing to them. The fact that I'd achieved something they'd never imagined I was capable of was confusing. I turned the phone face down and focused on the contract review. The terms were beyond generous. They were transformative. Not just financially, but professionally. I'd go from running a small firm to heading a division of a company that worked with clients I'd only dreamed of reaching. "Sarah," James said as we wrapped up, "I want you to know this offer isn't just about your company's performance metrics. It's about you. Your vision, your leadership, your potential. We're not just buying Meridian. We're investing in you." Investing in me. How long had I waited for someone in my life to say those words? "I'm interested," I said, and the understatement made them laugh. "Very interested. But I need to ask, this feels almost too good to be true. What's the catch?" "No catch," Rebecca said. "But there is a timeline. We need a decision by end of business Friday. The board meets Monday, and if we're moving forward, we want to announce the acquisition and your appointment simultaneously." Friday. 4 days to decide whether to accept an offer that would change my life forever. 4 days to figure out what this meant for my relationships, my identity, my future. "And one more thing," James added as we stood to leave. "We'd like to arrange a celebration dinner tomorrow night. Nothing formal, just the executive team and key stakeholders. It's important to us that this feels like a partnership, not just a transaction." A celebration dinner.
For me.
To honor what I'd built and what we were building together. The contrast with my birthday dinner 24 hours earlier was so stark it was almost absurd. Last night, my family couldn't spare $100 or a few hours to acknowledge my existence. Tonight, these executives were planning a dinner to celebrate my achievements. The flight back to home felt different than the trip to Chicago. Less nervous energy, more contemplative satisfaction. I'd proven to myself that the success wasn't a fluke. That the respect I'd earned was real. That the life I'd built had value independent of my family's recognition or approval. But as the plane descended toward home, I knew I was returning to a situation that had fundamentally changed. My family now knew about Meridian, about the acquisition, about the life I'd been living in parallel to the one they thought they knew. The question was, what did I want to do with that knowledge? My phone had been buzzing constantly during the flight. More messages from Madison, several missed calls from Mom, and a series of texts from Dad that were increasingly focused on practical matters, taxes, financial planning, investment strategies. Even now, even after everything, he was trying to position himself as necessary to my success. As if I hadn't just spent 2 hours with some of the most sophisticated financial minds in the country discussing my future. But there was one message that stood out from the rest from Mom. Sarah, I keep thinking about last night, and I feel sick about how we handled your birthday. I don't understand how we missed so much of your life, but I want to. Can we talk when you get home? Really talk, not just dinner conversation. I love you. I read it 3 times, looking for the underlying agenda, the way she might redirect the conversation back to Madison or minimize what I'd accomplished. But it seemed genuine. Scared, maybe, and definitely overwhelmed, but genuine. Maybe there was a conversation to be had. Maybe there was a way forward that didn't require completely cutting them out of this new chapter of my life. Or maybe I was just being naive again, looking for validation from people who'd spent 30 years proving they weren't capable of giving it. As we touched down, I made a decision. I'd give them one chance. One real, honest conversation about the past 30 years and what came next. One opportunity to show me they could see me as I actually was instead of who they decided I should be. But if they couldn't do that, if they fell back into old patterns, if they made this about Madison, if they tried to diminish or manage my success, then I'd move forward without them. I'd spent 30 years being the daughter who understood, who accommodated, who made herself small so everyone else could feel bigger. That daughter was gone. And the woman who'd taken her place had options they'd never bothered to imagine. There's a strange disorientation that comes with returning home after your entire life has shifted. The same streets, the same houses, the same coffee shop on the corner where I'd spent countless mornings before work, but I was seeing it all through different eyes now. The eyes of someone who belonged in 42nd floor boardrooms and private jets, not just the cramped studio apartment I'd been calling home for 3 years. Jennifer had arranged for a car to pick me up from the airport, a small luxury that felt enormous after years of taking rideshares and public transportation. As we pulled into my apartment complex, I realized how shabby it looked compared to the hotel I'd stayed at in Chicago. Not that there was anything wrong with it, but success has a way of recalibrating your perspective on what's possible. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the drive, but I'd ignored it. I needed a few hours to process everything that had happened, to figure out how I wanted to navigate the conversations waiting for me. The messages could wait. But when I got to my apartment, there was someone waiting for me in the lobby. Madison. She looked smaller somehow, sitting in one of the uncomfortable chairs by the mailboxes, scrolling through her phone with a kind of restless energy that meant she was anxious. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, almost dropping her purse. Sarah, she said, relief flooding her voice. I've been waiting for 2 hours. I didn't know when you'd be back. Shouldn't you be on a plane to Mexico? I asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. She flushed. I postponed the trip. I told Mom and Dad I couldn't leave with everything so unsettled. With you being upset. Postponed. The $12,000 retreat that had been so urgent yesterday, so essential to her healing journey, had been postponed because I was upset. Come upstairs, I said. We can talk. My apartment felt even smaller with Madison in it. She'd never visited before. In 3 years of living here, none of my family had ever been to my place. They'd never seen where I lived, how I lived, what my daily life actually looked like. Another small indication of how little they'd actually known about me. Madison looked around with poorly concealed surprise. The apartment was small, yes, but I'd made it beautiful in simple ways. Art from local artists on the walls, plants by the windows, a small bookshelf filled with business and personal development books. It was the home of someone building something, even if that someone had been invisible to her family. This is really nice, Madison said, and I could tell she meant it. I always pictured you somewhere more. I don't know. Corporate? I spent most of my time at the office, I said, settling onto the couch. This was just where I slept. She sat across from me in the armchair I'd bought at a thrift store and reupholster myself, back when I'd had more time than money and had to make do with creativity instead of resources. Sarah, she began, then stopped. Started again. I don't even know where to begin. Yesterday at dinner. I feel like I met a stranger. Like I don't know you at all. You don't, I said simply. None of you do. The words hung in the air between us. Not accusatory, just factual. A simple acknowledgement of 30 years of parallel lives that had never actually intersected. But why? She asked, and I could hear genuine confusion in her voice. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? About the company, about how well you were doing? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and tried to figure out how to explain something I wasn't sure she could understand. Madison, I said carefully, when was the last time anyone in our family asked me how I was doing? Really asked, and waited for a real answer? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. I could see her thinking, searching through memories and coming up empty. I mean, she said slowly, we always ask how things are going, and what do I always say? Another pause.
Fine.
You always say everything's fine. And does anyone ever follow up? Does anyone ever think maybe there's more to the story? Does anyone ever wonder what I do with my time, what I care about, what I'm working toward? The silence stretched between us. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I needed her to understand the reality of our family dynamic from my perspective. Sarah, she started then stopped. I guess I never thought. You always seemed so put together. So independent. Like you didn't need. Need what? Need attention? Need support? Need someone to notice when I was struggling or celebrating when I succeeded. That's not what I meant. Isn't it though? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. Madison, do you know that I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college? Do you know that I ate ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week for 2 years to save money to start my business? Do you know that there were nights I cried myself to sleep because I was so tired and scared and lonely, and I couldn't tell anyone because my role in this family was to be the stable one, the one who had everything figured out? When I turned back, she was crying. Quiet tears that she wiped away quickly, like she was embarrassed by them. I didn't know, she whispered. I really didn't know. Of course you didn't. Because whenever I tried to share something that mattered to me, the conversation somehow became about you. Your problems, your dreams, your needs. And everyone acted like that was natural, like it was my job to fade into the background so you could shine. That's not. I never asked for that. Didn't you? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. Every time I had something to share, you had a crisis. Every time I achieved something, you had a failure that needed more attention. Every time I needed support, you needed it more. She was crying harder now, but I couldn't stop. 30 years of suppressed frustration was pouring out of me, and I felt simultaneously guilty for hurting her and relieved to finally be saying these things out loud. Sarah, please, she said. I never meant. I didn't realize I was doing that. I sat back down across from her, my anger giving way to exhaustion. I know, I said more gently. I don't think any of you realized what you were doing, but that doesn't change the impact it had. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us processing. Finally, Madison spoke. The company, she said. Meridian. It's really worth that much money. 47 million, yes. Assuming I accept their offer. And you built it from nothing? From nothing. Just an idea, and a lot of very long days. She shook her head slowly. I can't even imagine. Madison, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. When was the last time someone in my family had said they were proud of me? When was the last time my achievements had been celebrated instead of minimized or overlooked? Thank you, I said and meant it. What happens now? She asked. With the company, I mean. And with us. That was the question, wasn't it? What happened now? I don't know, I said honestly. A lot depends on how this conversation goes with Mom and Dad. A lot depends on whether this family can change, or whether I need to build my new life separately from the old one. She nodded like she understood, though I wasn't sure she really did. Sarah, she said quietly, I want you to know that I'm going to do better. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to ask questions and actually listen to the answers. I don't want to be the sister who only knows you from a distance. I studied her face, looking for the sincerity behind the words. She looked younger than her 26 years, sitting there with tear-stained cheeks and messy hair, but also more real than I'd seen her in a long time. "I'd like that," I said. "But Madison, it's going to require more than just asking questions. It's going to require examining some difficult truths about how this family operates, about privilege and attention, and the ways we've all played roles in maintaining an unhealthy dynamic." She nodded again, more firmly this time. "I'm ready for that," she said. I think I need to understand some things about myself that I've been avoiding." It was a start, maybe not a complete transformation, but a willingness to begin one. That was more than I'd expected when I walked into the apartment an hour ago. "Okay," I said. "Then let's see what we can figure out together." But even as I said it, I knew the real test was still coming. Madison might be ready to change, but Mom and Dad were going to be a different story entirely. And tomorrow, I had to decide whether to accept an offer that would change my life forever, with or without my family's understanding. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. Madison had called them after leaving my apartment, and apparently there had been what she diplomatically referred to as a lot of discussion about timing, agenda, and who was going to say what to whom. I spent Saturday in my office, even though Meridian was officially closed for the weekend. Jennifer had left detailed notes about the Morrison Group timeline, the contract terms that needed final review, and the logistics for the celebration dinner on Monday, if I decided to accept. Everything was organized, professional, ready for my decision. But I couldn't focus on any of it. My mind kept drifting to the conversation waiting for me, to 30 years of family dynamics that were about to be laid bare and examined. When Sunday afternoon arrived, I dressed carefully. Not the jeans and sweater I might have worn to a casual family dinner, but the kind of sharp business casual I wore to important client meetings. I wanted to look like the person I'd become, not the person they remembered. I pulled into my parents' driveway at exactly 2 o'clock and saw Dad peering out the front window. He disappeared quickly when he saw me looking, but the gesture told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. He was nervous, which was unusual for a man who'd spent my entire life projecting absolute confidence in his opinions and decisions. Mom opened the door before I could knock. "Sarah," she said, and there was something fragile in her voice that I'd never heard before. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure. I said I'd be here." She nodded and stepped back to let me in. The house felt different somehow, though nothing had physically changed. The same furniture, the same family photos on the mantel, the same grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. But the atmosphere was charged with tension and uncertainty. Dad was sitting in his usual chair in the living room, trying to look casual while reading a financial magazine. Madison was curled up on the couch, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Sarah," Dad said, setting down the magazine with exaggerated casualness, "glad you could make it. I've been doing some research on acquisition tax strategies, and there are some things we should discuss." "No," I said quietly, taking a seat across from him. "We're not starting there." He blinked, clearly thrown off by the interruption. "I just think it's important to consider the financial implications." "Dad." My voice was calm, but firm. "We're not talking about money right now. We're talking about why I didn't feel comfortable sharing the most important thing in my life with my own family for 8 months. The silence that followed was profound. I could see Mom and Dad exchanging glances, could see Madison shrinking further into the couch cushions. "Sarah," Mom said carefully, "if we made you feel like you couldn't share good news with us, then we clearly did something wrong. But I think there might be some misunderstandings." "What part is the misunderstanding, Mom? The part where you canceled my birthday dinner to fund Madison's vacation? The part where you told me there was no room in the budget to celebrate my 30th birthday, but somehow found $12,000 for a yoga retreat? The part where you assumed I was stuck in a dead-end job while I was actually building a multi-million-dollar company?" Each word landed like a physical blow. I could see them all flinching, but I wasn't done. Or maybe the misunderstanding is the past 5 years of Dad telling me I needed to be more realistic about my career goals while handing Madison $50,000 for a business she had no experience running. Maybe it's the part where every family conversation somehow becomes about Madison's needs, Madison's dreams, Madison's problems. "That's not fair," Dad said, his voice rising. We've always supported both of you. Have you? I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, where I'd spent Saturday morning making a list. Dad, can you tell me the name of my first employer after college? He stared at me. Sarah, that's not. Can you tell me what my degree is in? What my specialization was? Of course I know. What about my apartment? Have you ever been there? Do you know what neighborhood I live in? The silence was damning. Mom, I continued, turning to her, can you tell me the last book I recommended to you? The last movie I said I enjoyed? The last time I mentioned being excited about anything, and you followed up by asking questions about it. Mom's face was crumpling. Sarah, we love you. I know you love me. But love without attention, love without interest, love without priority, what is that really worth? Madison spoke up for the first time. Sarah, I think what they're trying to say. Madison, I said, not unkindly but firmly, this is part of the problem. Even now, even in a conversation about how my voice gets lost in this family, you're speaking for them instead of letting them answer for themselves. She closed her mouth, looking stricken. I turned back to my parents. I need you to understand something. I didn't keep Meridian secret to hurt you, or to get back at you. I kept it secret because every experience I've had in this family taught me that my achievements would either be minimized, redirected, or somehow made about someone else. I kept it secret because I was protecting something precious from people who had consistently proven they didn't value what was precious to me. Dad was shaking his head. Sarah, that's not true. We've always been proud of you. When? The question came out like a challenge. When have you been proud of me, Dad? What specific achievement of mine can you remember celebrating? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. Your college graduation. Where you spent the entire reception talking to other parents about Madison's high school academic awards. The promotion at your marketing firm. That I mentioned once in passing, and you responded by saying it was about time I got some recognition for my work ethic, as if my previous lack of promotion was a character flaw rather than normal career progression. Each memory I cited was met with more silence. Not because they were denying the truth of what I was saying, but because they were finally seeing the pattern they'd been unconsciously perpetuating for decades. Mom was crying now. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I thought you were fine with how things were. You never complained. Because complaining got me labeled as jealous or ungrateful. Because every time I tried to ask for more attention, I was told that Madison needed it more right then. Because I learned that my role in this family was to be the stable, understanding one who didn't make waves. But we never meant, Dad started. I know you didn't mean to, I said, and my voice was gentler now. I don't think any of this was conscious or malicious. But the impact was real, regardless of the intent. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Madison and I had played as children. Back when the dynamics were simpler, before years of accumulated small choices had created the gulf between us. I got an offer on Friday, I said without turning around. Morrison Group wants to buy Meridian for $47 million and make me the head of their entire digital division. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. It would mean relocating to Chicago, traveling internationally, building something bigger than I ever imagined possible. I heard Mom gasp softly, and the first thing I thought when I heard the offer wasn't excitement about my future. It was sadness that I didn't have a family I felt comfortable sharing it with. It was grief for the support system I'd always wished I had but never experienced. I turned back to face them. So here's what's going to happen. I'm accepting the offer. I'm moving to Chicago. I'm starting a new chapter of my life, and I'm doing it with or without your understanding and support. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking. But I continued. If you want to be part of that new chapter, things have to change. Really change, not just surface-level adjustments that make you feel better about the past. Dad leaned forward. Sarah, tell us what you need. Tell us how to fix this. I looked at each of them, my parents, who'd raised me with good intentions but limited vision, Madison, who was still processing her own role in our family dynamics. I need you to see me, I said simply. not as an extension of your expectations or as a supporting character in someone else's story. As a whole person with my own dreams and struggles and achievements worth celebrating. We want to do that, Mom said, tears streaming down her face. We want to learn how to do that. Then it starts now, I said. It starts with acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility for the patterns that developed, and making a conscious choice to do better going forward. I sat back down, feeling both exhausted and hopeful. And it starts with you asking me about my life, really asking and really listening to the answers. It starts with celebrating my successes without immediately making them about someone else. It starts with treating my needs as legitimate instead of secondary. The conversation that followed wasn't easy. There were more tears, more painful acknowledgments, more moments of defensiveness that had to be worked through. But for the first time in 30 years, I felt like they were really hearing me. And for the first time in 30 years, I felt like I might actually want them to. 6 months later, I was standing in my corner office on the 42nd floor of Morrison Group headquarters, looking out at Lake Michigan and thinking about the distance between where I was and where I'd started. Not just geographically, though Chicago was 800 miles from the house where I'd grown up feeling invisible. But emotionally, professionally, personally, I'd traveled universes. The digital division I now headed had exceeded every projected metric. We'd landed 3 major international clients, launched an innovative AI-driven campaign platform, and doubled our revenue projections for the quarter. The team I'd built was collaborative, creative, and completely different from the family dynamics I'd grown up navigating. Here, good ideas were celebrated regardless of who had them. Here, success was shared rather than hoarded. Here, I was valued for my contributions rather than tolerated for my compliance. But the most surprising change hadn't been professional, it had been personal.
My family and I talk now.
Really talked. Not the surface-level check-ins we'd maintained for years, but actual conversations about goals, challenges, fears, and dreams. It hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy, but the foundation we'd started building that difficult Sunday afternoon had proven surprisingly solid. Dad had been the hardest to reach, his instinct still to offer practical advice rather than emotional support. But even he was learning. Last week, he'd called just to tell me he was proud of a quote from me he'd seen in Forbes magazine. Not to give me suggestions about leveraging the publicity or managing my public image, just to say he was proud. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. Mom had thrown herself into understanding my world with the same intensity she'd once devoted to managing Madison's crises. She'd read every article about Meridian, learned the names of my key team members, and even started following digital marketing trends so she could ask informed questions about my work. The effort was touching, even when her questions revealed how much she still didn't understand about what I did. And Madison had surprised me most of all. After that conversation in my apartment, she'd made the decision to decline the Tulum retreat entirely. Not postpone it again, decline it. She'd used the money Mom and Dad had set aside for the trip to enroll in a business development program instead. She was working now, for the first time in 3 years, as a junior marketing coordinator at a local nonprofit. I want to understand what it feels like to build something, she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. I want to know what you felt when you were creating Meridian. I want to earn something instead of just receiving it. The change wasn't without its challenges. Madison was learning what it meant to have a boss who expected results, to work on projects that didn't automatically bend to her preferences, to receive feedback that wasn't cushioned by unconditional love. There were tears, frustrations, moments when she called me convinced she wasn't cut out for the working world. But she was persisting. And slowly, I was watching her discover a confidence that came from achievement rather than entitlement. Our parents were struggling with the adjustment too. After 26 years of jumping to solve Madison's problems, they didn't know how to respond to her new independence. They'd call me, confused and worried, asking if they should intervene when Madison mentioned workplace stress or professional challenges. Let her figure it out, I'd tell them. Let her experience the satisfaction of solving her own problems. It was hard for them, but they were learning. The growth wasn't just one-directional, though. I was learning too, about forgiveness, about the difference between enabling someone and loving them, about how to maintain boundaries without cutting people off entirely. I'd also learned something crucial about revenge. The fantasy I'd harbored for years, of showing up my family, of forcing them to see their mistakes, of making them pay for the years of dismissal and neglect, had turned out to be less satisfying than I'd imagined. The real victory hadn't been in their shock when they learned about my success. It hadn't been in watching them scramble to understand how they'd misread me so completely. It hadn't even been in their apologies or their attempts to make amends. The real victory had been in building something worthwhile, regardless of their recognition. It had been in discovering that I didn't need their validation to value myself. It had been in learning that the most powerful response to being underestimated wasn't proving them wrong. It was becoming so successful that their opinions became irrelevant. But perhaps most importantly, I'd learned that the best revenge is a life well lived, shared with people who choose to see and celebrate you for who you really are. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Sarah, the team wants to know if you're available for the celebration drinks after the client presentation. We just landed the Hartwell account." I smiled, looking around at the office that had become more of a home than any childhood bedroom had ever been.
The team wanted to celebrate with me.
Not because they had to, not because family obligation demanded it, but because they valued working with me and wanted to share their success. Another text, this one from Madison. "Just got promoted to senior coordinator. 6 months ago, I didn't even know what a marketing campaign was. Thank you for showing me what's possible when you actually work for something." And then one from Mom. "Saw the article in Business Week about the Morrison Group's expansion into Asian markets. The journalist quoted you as the visionary behind the digital transformation. I read it 3 times. I'm so proud I could burst." I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow I had a board meeting to discuss opening offices in Tokyo and Singapore. Next month, I was keynoting a conference on digital innovation in London. Next quarter, we were launching a new AI platform that could revolutionize how companies approached customer engagement. My life had become bigger than I'd ever dared to imagine, filled with challenges that excited me and achievements that belonged entirely to me. And for the first time in 30 years, I had a family that was learning how to celebrate those achievements with me instead of despite me. The phone rang, my office line, not my cell. Jennifer had gone home an hour ago, which meant this was either an emergency or someone calling my direct number. "Sarah Chun," I answered. "Sarah, it's James Morrison. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to give you a heads up about something coming down the pipeline. The board met this afternoon about the European expansion we've been discussing. They want to fast-track the timeline, and they want you to lead the entire international division, not just digital." I felt that familiar flutter of excitement mixed with nerves that came with new opportunities. The entire division? The entire division. "Sarah, in 18 months, you've transformed how we think about client engagement, team leadership, and strategic growth. The board wants to see what you can do with an even bigger canvas." I thought about the girl who'd spent 30 years believing she was the supporting character in her own family story. The woman who'd built a company in secret because she didn't trust her own family to celebrate her success. The person who'd once measured her worth by other people's ability to see it. That person felt very far away now. "I'm interested," I said. "Very interested. I figured you would be. We'll talk details next week. But Sarah, this isn't just about expanding Morrison Group internationally. This is about establishing you as one of the premier business leaders of your generation. This is about building a legacy. A legacy. Not just professional success, but something that would outlast me. Something that would inspire other people who'd felt invisible, overlooked, underestimated." After I hung up, I sat in my office as the city lights began to twinkle below, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. The years of feeling invisible had taught me to see clearly. The experience of being underestimated had motivated me to exceed every expectation, including my own. The pain of family dynamics had pushed me to create professional relationships based on mutual respect and shared goals. Everything that had hurt me had also shaped me into someone capable of building something beautiful. My phone buzzed with one more text, this one from Dad. Sarah, your mom and I are planning a trip to Chicago next month. We'd love to see your office, meet your team, and take you to dinner somewhere that serves more than pot roast. We're proud of you, and we want to understand your world better. I smiled, typing back. I'd love that. Fair warning though, I'm going to give you the full office tour, complete with budget presentations and strategic planning sessions. Hope you're ready for a crash course in digital marketing. His response came quickly. Bring it on. We've got 30 years of catching up to do. As I finally gathered my things and prepared to leave the office, I realized that the story I'd been telling myself for years, about being the forgotten daughter, the overlooked sister, the undervalued family member, had become something else entirely. It had become the origin story of a woman who'd learned to value herself so completely that others had no choice but to follow suit. And that, I thought as I walked to the elevator that would carry me down to the car waiting to take me to dinner with friends who'd chosen me as much as I'd chosen them, was the best revenge of all. The elevator doors closed, and my reflection looked back at me from the polished steel, confident, successful, genuinely happy. The woman in that reflection bore little resemblance to the girl who'd once sat at family dinners hoping someone would notice she existed. That girl had spent 30 years waiting to be seen. This woman had learned to shine so brightly that being overlooked was no longer possible. And tomorrow, she was going to shine even brighter. If there's anyone out there listening to this who feels invisible in their own family, who's been told they're not ambitious enough or successful enough or important enough, I want you to know something. The people who can't see your worth don't get to determine your value. The people who consistently choose others over you don't get to define your potential. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop asking for their approval and start building something so impressive that their opinion becomes irrelevant. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is your success. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that success becomes the catalyst for everyone around you to become better versions of themselves too.
Take care of yourselves out there.
Build something beautiful. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you're the supporting character in your own story. You're the protagonist. You always have been. Now go prove it.